Module 2, Purposes for Assessment. People most often use language assessment to collect two kinds of data. One is connected with the learning of languages, with assessing the degree of progress towards a learning goal. These purposes are important in school and other educational settings, and so the assessment used to collect the data come under the heading of educational assessment. Educational language assessment usually takes place within language programs. The procedures are usually based on content that has been taught, are frequently developed and carried out by teachers, and can often be flexible, allowing for the use of observational techniques, watching and recording what learners do. Portfolios, collection for learners' work. Self-assessment, learners making judgment about their own abilities. And informal tests of quizzes, as well as formal tests administered under more strictly controlled conditions. The second kind of information is connected with whether or not a person's language ability is adequate to satisfy some predetermined need or standard. This is known as proficiency assessment. The assessment of language proficiency is usually connected to the language and related skills that are needed to carry out a job, study an academic subject, or fearful other kind of role. Because the focus is not on what the assessee has been taught, this kind of assessment is less likely to be carried out by teachers and more likely to involve formal tests administered under controlled, uniform, standardized conditions and produced by national or international agencies. Proficiency assessments are distinct from educational assessments because they do not center on learning process or the outcomes of a particular course of study. Proficiency assessments are connected with a person's current functionality rather than with their learning. What the assessee can accomplish taught their use of language now, not how they reach this point, or how long it might take them to arrive at a higher level of ability. In proficiency assessments, the issue is whether or not the person being assessed has sufficient language ability to satisfy certain needs. Proficiency assessments are often used to gatekeeping decisions, imagination, access to employment and educational opportunities. This may relate a relatively specific purpose, such as using the language in leading groups of tourists around a city, working as a dentist, steering ship in international waters, or studying marketing at a university. Or it may be for less specialized or less clearly definable general purpose that might apply to a very wide range of language users. Tasks that many language users might need to carry out at some point might include reserving a room in a hotel or guest house, filling in forms with basic personal information, buying food, following television news programs, reading articles in popular magazines, or holding conversations about personal experiences. Educational assessment in teaching and learning. Assessment can take place at different stages during the learning process. Before they begin a course in a new language, we may be interested in the learner's aptitude for language learning, their potential to learn. Although we know that almost anyone can learn a foreign language, given the time and motivation, some people may be predisposed to make faster progress than others. A sports coach looking for someone with a potential to be a good basketball player may try for find someone who is tall and able to jump high. With quicker actions, good coordination and a competitive spirit. In the same way, some selective language training programs, such as those organized by the military, need to pick from a large group of applicants those with the greatest potential to learn a language quickly. The Pimsleur language. Aptitude battery. Pimsleur ETAL 2004. For example, set out in identity as potential language learners individuals with a good memory for words, shapes, and sound who are good at discriminating between similar sounds, good in identifying grammatical patterns, and who have an interest in other cultures. Partly because motivation is now widely regarded as more important than aptitude in sharing language learning success, and partly because most language courses cater for learners with already have some knowledge of a language. Aptitude tests are not as widely as they used to be. It is more often the case that course providers which wish to find out how much of the content of the course language learners already known before they begin, or how much they have learned by the end. In this case, assessment may be prognostic, looking forward to the content planned by the course and deciding on priorities, or concerned with achievement, looking back to what the learners have been taught to find out how much they have absorbed and what might need to be covered again. At aptitude and prognostic assessment are used to inform selection and decisions. Deciding with learners might require language courses or choosing those most likely to succeed. They may also be used to inform placement decisions. Decisions about which the available classes best matches each learner's needs. During course, achievement assessment as progress tests might be used to gauge the ongoing improvement made by making pass-fail decisions or in assigning grades. In using achievement assessment, the teacher may be interested in obtaining details diagnostic information about these parts of the material the learners have taken in and which parts will need more work. In assessing learning, A distinction is often made between more normative uses of assessment that immediately guide the teachers and learners will do next, and more summative uses, which focus on a retos- retrospective picture of what have been learned. Another way of expressing this distinction is to call the former assessment for learning and to contrast this with assessment of learning. Black and William, 1998. In other words, in Wiggins' 1998, 1998 terms summative assessment audits learning. Formative assessment inform it. An example of the use of formative and diagnostic assessment would be a teacher observing that some students are having difficulty in distinguishing between for and since when taking about time in English. The teacher might decide to intervene by asking questions and providing examples to help build their understanding of the distinction. This kind of assessment informs learning because the teacher is able to adjust the content of her classes to make account of the students' performance. The focus is on what should happen next in the classroom to bring about learning. An example of a more summative assessment would be an end-of-year test based on the topics taught during the year. The test audits learning by providing evidence of what the students have learned and how well they have met the course objectives. The focus is on finding out how much learning has happened. Like the formative assessment described above, such as tests might include questions dealing with specific points of grammar, such as the four sins description found in the diagnostic test. But the result may not be available until the school year has finished and there is no immediate opportunities to work on improving performance as all the students have left. In this case, the results might be used for program evaluations or judgments about the effectiveness of the language course rather than on the abilities of individual learners. Gaining an awareness of how well the learners are progressing is, of course, easier when the learners are also involved and interested in the process and share their insight with their teacher. Good learners set themselves targets. Think about how best to learn, trying and out evaluating new techniques, and often reflect on their own progress towards their goals. Self-assessment and peer assessment, in which learners assess their own and each other's performance, have engaged as powerful means of engaging learners in this process and helping them to make more control of their own learning. Of course, teaching can become more challenging when the learners do not want to learn or unwilling to communicate. This brings us another reason for using assessment. Motivating learners because assessment are often associated with rewards, access to opportunities such as courses or jobs, prizes, certificates, grades, praise, and attention for the teachers. They can serve as a powerful motivation for learners. However, using assessment in this way is risky and potentially very damaging. In some cases, it can actually have a negative effect of a learner's motivation. The learners who repeatedly fail to gain good grades or pass tests will sooner or later become frustrated. Frustrated rather. Conclude that language learning is not worth to effort and give up even trying to learn. Formative diagnostic assessment by providing helpful feedback, information about performance that can show the learning what he or she needs to do in order to improve. Promises to guide learners in their studies. However, for many learners, especially those in formal schooling, success on tests, especially major proficiency tests, may come to seem more important than successful communication in the language they are learning. Where this happens, the content of the test can take over from the official curriculum and learning goals that are not covered. And the test may get pushed aside and ignored. Teachers may teach and students may try to learn only the material that they think will be assessed. The changes in teaching and learning that may come about in response to an upcoming test are known as washback. And this has engaged as an important area of language assessment research. Feedback and washback are discussed in more detail in Module 4. Educational assessment, on the other hand, particularly formative assessment. The proficiency assessment, on the other hand, often seem as distinct, even in compatible areas of specialization, conducted by different people employing different techniques, informed by different theories, and embracing different values. For this reason, they are often treated separately, and the relationship between them ranges from mutual indifference to sometimes heated conflict. This conflict is most often played are in the field of summative assessment, where the role of the teachers as the facilitator of learning. The word of formative assessment comes up against the needs of accounts for what has been learned in terms of the general standards set by employers, governments, of other external agencies. The words of summative assessment and proficiency assessment. Although the difference between what teachers do in the classroom and large-scale testing are important, there is also a good deal in common between them. To be effective, both depend above all on well-crafted questions on other techniques that will provide useful evidence of learners' abilities. Task type used in large-scale tests can be adapted for use in the classroom, while innova- innovative ideas first tried out in class can find their way into more formal assessments. Both classroom assessment and large-scale tests can be improved by careful and critical review and through experience. The result from an assessment on one occasions inevitably points to improvements to be made the next time in is used. Achieving good quality in both requires collecting and systematic efforts. Ways of checking and improving language assessment are described in Module 3 and 4. Perhaps the strongest arguments for testing assessment in the classroom and in the examinations hall in the same book is that in a healthy educational system, both should work together. If teachers understand how tests work, they will be more effective at preparing their students to take examinations. On the other hand, as Alderson's 1999 remarked, testing is too important to be left to testers. It is need and interest to learn. Teachers are familiar with their learners and with the reality of how the curriculum is delivered in practice. They are therefore well placed to judge the content of tests and to hold the test makers to account.